Hello, let's go back to the discussion of literature. After we discussed literary forms, now we will discuss the material from the literary division. Literature is divided into two divisions. The first is prose and the second is poetry. Prose. Prose is the most typical form of language, applying ordinary grammatical structure and natural flow of speech rather than rhythmic structure, as in traditional poetry. While there are critical debates on the construction of prose, its simplicity and loosely defined structure has led to its adoption for the majority of spoken dialogue, factual discourse as well as topical and fictional writing. It is commonly used, for example, in literature, newspapers, magazines, encyclopedias, broadcasting, film, history, philosophy, law and many other forms of communication. Prose is divided into two, namely fiction and nonfiction. 1. Fiction is the form of any narrative or informative work that deals, in part or in whole, with information or events that are not factual, but rather, imaginary, that is, invented by the author. Although fiction describes a major branch of literary work, it may also refer to theatrical, cinematic or musical work. Fiction contrasts with nonfiction, which deals exclusively with factual, or, at least, assumed factual, events, descriptions, observations, etc. For example, biographies, histories. A. Fairy tale. Fairy tales are one of the folktales that are quite diverse in scope and come from various ethnic groups, communities, or certain regions in various parts of the world. For example, stories about kings, queens, princes and princesses with a touch of magic. B. Mythology means the science of literary forms that contain sacred conceptions and fairy tales about the life of gods and spirits in a culture. For example, story about gods and goddesses. C. Legend, story about the origin of a place or a thing. D. Novel, a long narrative with an organized plot usually with a maximum of 500 pages. E. Novelette, a narrative with an organized plot usually with a maximum of 300 pages. F. Short story, a narrative with an organized plot usually with a maximum of 100 pages. G. Fable, story that uses animals as characters and with moral lesson. H. Parable, story used by Jesus in teaching the good news. I. Allegory, story that uses symbolism to represent an idea. 2. Nonfiction is the form of any narrative, account, or other communicative work whose assertions and descriptions are understood to be factual. This presentation may be accurate or not, that is, it can give either a true or a false account of the subject in question. However, it is generally assumed that authors of such accounts believe them to be truthful at the time of their composition or, at least, pose them to their audience as historically or empirically true. Note that reporting the beliefs of others in a nonfiction format is not necessarily an endorsement of the ultimate veracity of those beliefs, it is simply saying it is true that people believe them, for such topics as mythology, religion. Nonfiction can also be written about fiction, giving information about these other works. A. Autobiography, life story of a person written by himself. B. Biography, life story of a person written by another person. C. Newspaper, collection of news articles about various current events. D. Magazine, collection of articles regarding the lifestyle of man. E. Journal, daily record of personal events. F. Planner, daily record of business commitments. G. Anecdote, a brief, revealing account of an individual person or an incident. Thank you, see you in the next lesson.